everybody. Welcome to Radio Dead Air Tech Q&A. You've got questions. We've got guesses. I'm Nash. I've been doing Radio Dead Air for, good God, only knows how long at this point. Let me turn that up just a little bit.
I moved to California.
Yeah. But in addition to that, I am also an IT professional. With me, as always, my producer, Mike Gearman, also works in IT. If you've got tech questions for Mike and myself, you can send those to request@radiodeadair.com. We have room for those tonight. Got some news stories we're going to hop into. Real quick before we do, it's not a new microphone. It's a new microphone.
It's new to you.
Yeah, new to me. I had, if you check our VOD on Twitch earlier this week, I got to do something a little neat. This is a Studio Projects C3, and it's a Chinese-made microphone based on a U.S. design, and it was made back in 2012. Nothing special except it's got there are two parts to a condenser microphone like this, and I can use my backup microphone to demonstrate. There are two parts. Up here, inside this screened area, is what's called a capsule. On condenser microphones, it runs a charge between two layers. I think it's charged between two membranes, and that enables the vibrations to be picked up when you talk into it. That's why condenser microphones need power. That the capsule's up there, and the other part of it down along here has a circuit in there to handle equalization, amplification, that sort of stuff.
And the quality of that circuit varies dramatically from microphone to microphone.
Yes. But the nice thing about this one is the C3, the Studio Project, which they don't make anymore, as a matter of fact, is it has a very nice capsule in it. It's a K67 style capsule, which is very nice. It's just they paired it with an equalization circuit that did not, it let all the high frequencies through, and it was very tinny sounding, and just that's similar to that. The K67 capsule is one called the Neumann U87. Now, this is a pretty much legendary microphone that has been around for like 50 plus years. It's like, oh, this is the best recording microphone. It's like NPR uses that all the fucking time. The thing is, the Neumann U87 starts at about $4,000, which is crazy. So what a wonderful website, microphone-parts.com, what they did was they made a little kit. Don't know how well you can read that right there, but they made this wonderful little kit, reconfigures the equalizer to sound more like a Neumann U87. It's not 100%, but it's about 90%. So in essence, for about $150 bucks.
How much does that kit cost?
Well, the kit cost $60, and the microphone itself cost $150 bucks. And that's about $210 for a microphone that sounds very similar to a $4,000 microphone.
Which is a pretty good deal.
That is a pretty good deal, yes. These are, they don't make them anymore, but, I took advantage of. There's another one that's similar to this called the C1. It's just missing a few little features, but it's also very close, and they have a kit for that one as well. So if you're interested, it's a little bit of soldering, which I did live. It's a very simple kit, all told. If you're interested in that, you can look it up. It's at microphone-parts.com. They also have parts for other condenser microphones if you want to tinker around with that stuff. So yeah, we got a nice little microphone upgrade on the cheap. Wanted to mention that. Well, let's move on to some news stories before we get to your tech questions tonight. And
I felt a pattern in our news stories tonight, and that pattern is not great for Intel.
Not great for AMD either, but much worse.
I slightly disagree with you, and I'll get to why when we get to that story.
Okay, yeah. Well, in my estimate, it's much worse for Intel this week.
So you may recall last week we had the story about, hey, the Intel chip may be problems may be caused by corrosion, and now we've got Intel saying not really. It's caused by overvoltage.
Actually, combination of the two.
It could easily be both.
Last week we talked about how there was speculation around the problem that was causing, in case you haven't been following along, Intel's 13th and 14th gen processors, the higher end ones, the 14700s, the 13700s, 13900s, 14900s, have been displaying some instability to the point of making them unusable in
They've been eating themselves.
Yeah. One of the causes for this that was sort of leaked out there into the tech world was a matter of oxidation in the assembly. Yep. And that, in short, just to sum that up quickly, they assembled them badly, faulty assembly, and it was preventing the electricity from traveling properly through the chip, and it was causing instability. And that's only true for a unknown. Intel just said the problem only happened during 2023, but 2023 is a long period. It's for an unknown number of 13th generation processors. Not the 14th gen do not suffer from the oxidation problem. The 13th gen, some of them do.
Yep.
But which ones?
And by the way, this is apparently the degradation is affecting any Raptor Lake CPU with a TDP of 65 watts or higher. It's not just the Core i9s, it's just that what is happening is much more visible and noticeable on the Core i9s.
Yeah. So
because they're drawing more power.
So that's the i5s and up. Which it's for a reason it's not affecting the i3 is that, well, I think the 14100 is still a 12100. It's still technically the i3s are still 12th gen parts. They didn't bother. I know the 13100 is still a 12th gen part. It's just rebadged. What has happened with these CPUs is because of elevated voltages, incorrect settings. Intel goofed this all up, and motherboard manufacturers did not help. These chips are damaged.
Yes.
Some of them have been.
The algorithm used by the CPUs to request voltage from the motherboard was requesting too much.
So, and what happens when a CPU pulls too much voltage? Any kind of chip that pulls too much voltage is degradation. Yeah, eventually the chip can no longer maintain that electricity eats away at the transistors, and eventually it can no longer behave in its specified, it can't operate within specifications anymore. You can lower the clock speeds under the advertised specifications, and it may start working again because the degradation is not that bad, but it's never going to operate at full power that it should be.
But the other part about that is, unless you get the microcode update, if you lower it, it's still requesting more voltage than it should at that lower level.
So even if you turn the clock speed down,
it'll continue to grade. Now, if your CPU is not damaged already and you get the microcode update, you're not supposed to have any damage. It's going to go, okay, we fixed this. Now, there's probably a performance hit because, hey, that extra voltage was probably making it work briefly a little better.
Maybe. It's hard to tell.
Little faster. It is hard to tell. It's one of those things where Sparks came out.
Hardware Unboxed is probably, I imagine once this is all said and done and the microcode is actually fully distributed, Hardware Unboxed will do a comparison. It's what they do. But this is going to mean you have to upgrade. If you're using a 13th or 14th gen Intel CPU, i5 or higher, you're going to have to upgrade the BIOS on your motherboard. And if it's already showing degradation, the microcode isn't going to help because it's already...
Got to RMA it. Yeah, you've got to RMA it to Intel. And they're not doing a recall. They will RMA, but they're not putting out a recall notice.
Yeah.
Which means if you are unaware that this is a problem and you're having this problem, and you're just like, oh, well, it just blue screens once in a while. And you don't know because there was no recall, well, you're out of luck.
This is, and another reason why this is both the 13th and 14th gen is they're both 13th gen. There is no 14th gen. The 14th gen are just slightly selected to operate higher versions of the 13th gen parts. They're the same generation. It's just Intel wanted...
hasn't had an original FD in a while.
It's all marketing. The 14th generation was all marketing. So now it looks like instead of they're actually just admitting one generation is bad, now it looks like Intel created two bad generations of CPUs. There's marketing for you. Another issue. So if you already own one of these, you can RMA these parts. Intel will respect the RMAs because it's kind of a clusterfuck. But if you don't know, then you don't know. And a lot of people aren't going to know.
Yeah. And now, if you're listening to this or, and you have one of these, RMA it sooner rather than later, because it might come to the point where Intel says, yeah, we're done doing the RMAs. We set a cutoff date that we didn't tell anyone about, or it will become too expensive for them to RMA any further. Which we've seen before with other companies where they go, yeah, we're gonna replace it. Oh, we're not gonna replace this anymore.
Yeah, eventually, I mean, those BIOS updates the microcode has to come out soon, because right now you can't safely operate one of these CPUs until it gets the microcode update. Even if I guess you could try to turn down the wattage, you can turn down the voltage on the motherboard, but if the microcode's asking for more voltage, you'd have to be able to throttle. You have to try and throttle it. You'd have to go into BIOS and screw around to maybe try and keep your CPU from getting worse. Another thing this is going to affect this is normally when people get upgrades, they'll put their old parts up there used. I don't see.
Don't buy. I'm telling you all right now. Don't buy a used 13th or 14th gen. Not worth it. That
is going to be so bizarre to see, like, the resale value on these things be zero. That's crazy. Because even like a 10-year-old Intel CPU is still going for about $50 or so. 4790 is not 14 years old or 10 years old yet. It's pretty old though. But heck, people even buy Intel i5 2600Ks from way back. Those still have value. These aren't, because there's no good way of being able to, you cannot identify from looking at it, from just even putting it in CPU and see if it'll boot. You cannot identify a bad one until you start using it and it displays instability. That's a mess. You cannot trust these parts. So everyone who got one of these has been stuck with not just a lemon for now, but a lemon for when they try to flip it to, put some more upgrade parts in their system. If we're talking used full, built systems, desktop systems that have these, off the shelf, already assembled, those are going to be looked at askance on the used market.
I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. It didn't occur to me until just now. I need to check what our high-end machines at work are using and say, hey, do we need to look at this? I know of at least one high-end machine that has had some instability issues. And now I'm going, I should check that one out.
But at least Intel has a newer, better generation of CPUs coming, right? Right?
No.
So there have been some leaks for the Intel Core Ultra 9 Arrow Lake, which is the Arrow Lake is the architecture that's going to come after Raptor Lake. There have been some leaks about these performance.
I'm going to make one clarification here. This is Arrow Lake, as in
Arrow Lake.
bow and arrow, not AERO or something of that nature. Just because the reason I think that's important to make that distinction, Nash, is so we can make Intel shot themselves in the foot with their Arrow Lake jokes.
Now, first off, we want to clarify these are qualification samples, so these are still engineering. They're still working on them, but as of right now, these are running at 250 watts. So Intel has not reduced the power consumption.
Nope.
Whereas AMD, for their 9000 series Ryzen 9000, has reduced the power consumption.
Yep.
So they're still using 250 watts, and it looks like the approximate overall average performance increase between Raptor Lake and Arrow Lake is going to be about 4%.
Yeah.
4%.
Now, that's the kind of percentage increase that users don't notice. And I'm serious.
No.
It's if it was 8 to 10%, people go, yeah, this seems a little perkier. If it was above 10%, they'd go, oh yeah, this is faster.
To put it in perspective, AMD is, and keep in mind this is AMD's numbers. We're gonna have hard benchmarks when the parts come out. Yeah. AMD is expecting, say, the 9900X to be about 15 to 18% faster than the 7900X.
Yep.
That's a big old jump.
Yeah.
Now, part of the problem here is, and this is my speculation, but part of the problem here is Intel has stated that the Core Ultra 9 is not going to have hyperthreading anymore. They're just using the cores as they are with no hyperthreading. Hyperthreading is a system by which one core can do two jobs at the same time. The only trouble is that introduced the ability to exploit those. It was doing it by way of a prediction system, by way of saying this is what normally happens, and it was making some guesses, and people were using that to exploit it. Well, with Arrow Lake, they can't do that anymore because there's no more hyperthreading. However, you're only getting a 4% uplift. Now, again, these are qualification samples. These are not the final ones that are going to go out. There is room for tweaking.
Yeah.
But
okay, so we say tweaking here. If a tweak, this is the qualification sample, 4%. If they got it to 6%, I'd say, yeah, that's tweaking. If they said, oh yeah, no, we got it all the way up to 15%, I'm like, some bullshit happened here.
And this is oof, because the 14900K is already behind the AMD in terms of gaming performance, and the 7950X was, I think, also beating the 14900K in productivity. So they were already slipping behind. If all they get from the next generation is a 4% boost, and AMD is getting something like 10 to 15 or 15% and up boosts on their next generation, Intel is screwed. Just they practically have no improvements generation to generation, and AMD will just be lapping them. And even if they do manage to get this. Say they get to a full 10% improvement over the last generation. They're still using 250 watt parts. The 7950X, the top end, is going to be 170 watts, same as it is now. But everything lower than that, the 9900K, 900X, the 9700X, the 97, every part below the top end is going to be using less power than the previous generation, but performing faster.
Yeah.
And rumors are, again, these are rumors, but the X3D parts, the gaming, they're instead of being locked down like they are in the current version, the 9000 series, you'll be able to overclock them a little bit. So Intel is in a terrible situation here. What the hell happened?
Very little sympathy for them.
I mean, yeah, I'm not really sympathizing here, but what the hell? This Arrow Lake was supposed to be their salvation. It was a whole new architecture. It was a new lithography, smaller nanometer process. It was supposed to be their next big thing to redeem them after doing the same thing over and over and over again, getting us up to Raptor Lake. What happened? Like 200 and still using 250 watts for these. Still hideously inefficient. What in the fuck? Like, this isn't quite bulldozer bad, but it's close.
I'm going to disagree there. I think it is kind of bulldozer bad.
Really?
I think it's certainly closer to bulldozer than anything they've done.
It's closer. I mean, keep in mind, bulldozer parts were slower than the previous generation. That was the part that made people go, what the hell?
And I'm going to state that these are in-house Intel numbers.
Yeah.
And we won't know the real numbers until an independent lab says.
Yeah. For those of you who are new to the computer space, what we're talking about when we talk about bulldozer, AMD about 10 years back, they had some pretty good success with their Phenom series of chips and their Athlon series. They were not the fastest on the market, but they were very competitive versus Intel. Price was good. You could overclock very nicely. It was, they ran hot, but they were a bargain at that price. So AMD's next architecture to follow the Phenom for their FX series of chips was called Bulldozer. And they tried a new system for cores and floating point units and how the chip worked. And when it was finally put into practice, bulldozer parts were in some instances slower than Phenom and Athlon parts.
Yeah.
It nearly destroyed AMD. It nearly they nearly almost not existing anymore because Intel had their core parts at the time. They had Core Duo, then came once they got to the 2600K, the i5 2600K and the i7 2700K, Intel just owned the market for a good long period there until 2017 with the release of Ryzen. AMD was effectively sidelined and their company almost died. Now, Intel is a much larger market share than AMD. But considering that AMD is offering better performance at a lower power level, hi Charlie, and they're cheaper, what does Intel have aside from their reputation? And that's not looking real great right now. What's the performance difference on low power? We don't know yet, Richard. These are really early numbers. We're gonna have to get some hard numbers later.
This is the 250 watts being pushed through it numbers.
Yeah, we'll have to see what comes out officially, but it doesn't look good. We'll have to maybe these are just maybe they will turn around. Maybe these are just early. We'll see. But AMD has got a little itty bitty problem of their own on their side.
Yes, but this is where I'm going to challenge you on something.
Okay. Initially, all of the Ryzen 9000 CPUs were set to launch on July 31st. Well, they've been pushed back several weeks. And the reason AMD is giving is that let's see, who is coming? They're staggering the launches.
Yes.
Yeah. The Ryzen set originally all of them were to come out on the 31st. Now the Ryzen 7 9700X and the Ryzen 5 9600X are coming out on August 8th. And the Ryzen 9 9950X and the Ryzen 9 9900X are coming out on August 15th.
Which is not really a significant delay. When what they said is, hey, we've got some issues with a minor issue with production here. We pulled back some parts. We're going to give them new parts and everything will be good. Now, the reason I think this is okay for AMD is because everyone is still looking at how Intel has botched the 13th and 14th gens. And
it's true.
The recurring things there. And they're going, hey, these guys are being proactive in fixing their stuff. I wonder what that's like.
AMD has not specifically said what the problem is. All they've said is, quote, the initial production units that are shipped to our channel partners did not meet our full quality expectations. We're not 100% clear on what that means. But it means that whichever ones are already out there, something must have happened in quality testing to make them go, uh-oh. So they're going to be bringing those parts back in and putting good ones into the channel. So anything that's actually out there shipped and about to hit store shelves and Newegg has and Amazon has, those are going to have to go back. And it's hard to understand what the problem is. Some people, who's it? I think Gamers Nexus estimated that it might be a packaging issue, i.e. how the chips are assembled, which is not great, but not terrible. Yeah. Maybe it has something to do with the heat sink. Maybe it has, or the heat spreader, but not so intrinsic as the whole line screwed. So yeah, whatever the issue, AMD's taking them back and they're putting out what they're calling quote unquote fresh units, which sounds vaguely a little suggestive. I don't know. These units are very fresh. I don't know, but
as long as they're not naming the product line after a couch, we're okay.
That is weird. I just watching that man is being destroyed. It's hilarious. So we're not going to have full, numbers on these for a few weeks. The stagger launch, it's really not affecting anything. Because the new motherboards aren't coming out until September anyway. So whatever you're using these in, you're probably going to be using them in a 600 series motherboard. So we'll just have to see how they test when they come out. Who knows? Might be fine. I think that the AMD being proactive here. Yeah, you're right, Mike. This does look better for them. It's not. It's still going to cost them money.
It could hardly look worse than what Intel is doing.
It's true. This is still going to cost them. This is still, it doesn't look, it's not great. It's not good for their bottom line, but Intel is in way worse shape. Oh, fuck yes. All right. Now that we have done that, it's time to answer your questions. We've got room for them tonight. If you still have them, you can send those to requests@radiodeadair.com. Also, I need to double check and see if there are any comments on the YouTube that are questions. What are they? Not subtitles, comments. There we go. Okay, let's see. All right. People talking about CrowdStrike mostly. Yeah, nothing. All right, no new ones on YouTube yet. All right. So let's look at the ones we already have here. Okay, this first one's from Raymond. He says, "Hey Nash and Mike and kiddies, Corsair has a sale on one of their 27-inch OLED monitors. I'll put that up on screen here so you know which one we're talking about. And I've been waiting a really long time to switch to 4K, so I decided I might give this a shot. The one thing I don't really have a grasp on is HDR. For one, it doesn't have one of those HDR numbers I've seen on other monitors, but it says it can use HDR, so I'm kind of confused there. The other thing is, I don't know how HDR works with Windows. Is it auto detect, or do I need to install something, and do I need to get new cables? Okay, HDR, what is it?
You don't need new cables.
What is HDR? It is high dynamic range. I think I finally got that right for the first time. HDR is a new no, that's a 4K. Oh, that's not a 4K. All right. Well, Raymond, first of all, that's not a 4K. That's a 1440p. So it is 240 hertz. So it's fast as hell, but that's not a 4K. It's an OLED, and it's fast, but it's not 4K. So keep that in mind. But HDR is an improved color range on video. It allows things to have deeper blacks and more lifelike and vivid colors for videos. However, most HDR has to be done, it has to be mixed separately. It's like there's HDR 10, there's Dolby Vision, there's HDR 10 plus. There are different methods of doing it. But in general, it has to be done in advance. You can't just watch something that was made like 20 years ago and just like boop HDR. There is HDR sort of upscaling. We call the old version is standard dynamic range, and then we have high dynamic range. So SDR can kind of be upscaled ish to HDR, but it's not perfect. The other thing is that number, you'll see this on a lot of monitors. It's HDR 400, HDR 600, 800, 1000. What that number designates is the VESA Standards Commission, the video, what is it? VES, Video and Standards. So it's Video something Standards Association.
Video Electronics Standards Association.
There you go. I missed one letter.
It was either going to be electronics or engineering. What it was going to be.
They have, that's what they've decided on those numbers. And those numbers mean brightness in nits. I don't know why they're called nits. I don't know why the unit of brightness is called nits, but they are nits. So if we say HDR 400, that means the overall brightness of the monitor with HDR engaged is 400 nits. HDR 400 is on the very, very low end of what can be considered high dynamic range. And they rarely look really good. Typically you want something HDR 800 and up, 800 nits, 1000 nits. That's where you want brightness. And OLED has had some issues with brightness. It can do really good blacks, and because OLED can just shut off the entire pixel, and the way it handles it's a very expensive way of doing it. But in terms of brightness, they've struggled with that. So I looked at the specs on this, and this, it says HDR with 1000 nit peak brightness. That set off some alarm bells for me. It's sort of like how, remember back in the day, you'd see computer that they'd have like, this is a 400 watt power supply. And it was a 400 peak watt power supply.
Yeah.
When in actuality, it could only run safely at like 200, 250 watts. And if you tried to run it at 400 watts, it would burn itself up. That's a bit how I feel with they're calling it 100,000 nits. If you read down further into it, the overall, it's something like 450. They don't have a certification number on this one. So that also set some alarm bells for me. They didn't get the proper VESA HDR certification. They say it's HDR compatible, but they don't have that HDR certification number on there, which also let me, alarm bells going off.
Now, I will say, one thing I'll say here. For $50 more, they do have a 4K monitor, which apparently does have the certification and is HDR 600.
Do you have the link for that?
I just clicked on their monitors thing and said, what do you have in 4K?
Okay, let me see. Shit, man.
It's like their only 4K monitor.
Monitors. Where is I'm looking for 4K. Where the hell?
Native resolution on the left.
All right. Yeah, that is the monster. Is that an OLED? I'm gonna see. Yeah, it's a 32-inch. That is 4K. It's only 144 hertz, so if the refresh rate matters to you. But this one is HDR 600 compliant. So that's a thing. Is it on sale too? Or no, it's not on sale. It's just, but it's 800.
It's not on sale, but it's $50 more.
Okay,
than what it was on sale.
It's not OLED. It's IPS. This is an IPS panel. In plane switching. OLED is organic light emitting diodes. Those are the ones with the really good blacks. LEDs, not as good. So, but this is the only one Corsair has. You might want to look around for 4K in 27. This might not be the one Corsair might not be the one you want to go with for this. Like ViewSonic will probably have good stuff. Dell will have good stuff. Gigabyte surprisingly has some really good monitors. They've gotten into they've gotten into the monitor game in a while back. Anyway, so this might not be a great monitor. Anyway, the other parts of your questions, how HDR works with Windows. Is it auto detect or do I need to install something? You don't need to install something. Windows 10 and up handle HDR natively, but there is a setting. It's under your display. Depending on which monitor you end up getting, sometimes it's automatic detect for the monitor, the software in the monitor. Sometimes you have to go into the monitor settings and turn it on. Then in Windows, you have to go into the settings and turn it on. It's not just a key press. They don't make it easy. And the other issue about it is you don't just want to leave HDR on all the time because some stuff doesn't look good in HDR because it's not made for it. If you try to run standard definition, standard dynamic range in high dynamic range, it can look washed out and wrong. So, and also depending on how the backlighting works for, if it's OLED or if it's IPS, pardon me, however the backlighting works, it can put halos and ghosting depending on how the monitor is assembled. So you're only going to want to turn HDR on in Windows when you want to play an HDR game or watch an HDR movie. You don't just want to leave it turned on 24/7.
Yeah, and it's certainly no good for, I've got to do something in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, don't. It's not good for desktop stuff. Maybe, hopefully, at some point, Microsoft will go, oh, we should probably just make like a key press or a switch for this that people could just maybe, instead of having to dig down into display to turn it on and off. But
someday, maybe they'll put some processing power towards, they're doing desktop stuff. Let's automatically turn HDR off. Oh, that looks like it's a game. Let's turn it on.
As to the new cables, well, that's a question of how old are the cables you currently have.
Yes, I said no at the beginning of the question, but that is a valid point.
We mentioned this before. This goes for both HDMI and DisplayPort. The cables have generations. They have versions. And the earlier, while it's all backwards compatible, you are limited in speed to the slowest component. For example, if you're using HDMI 1.0 cables, you can, even if you have an HDMI 2.1 monitor and 2.1 video card, you're only going at HDMI 1.0 because the cable can only handle that speed. So depending on how old your cables, I would recommend, they're not that expensive. Monoprice has got some very reasonably priced cables. If you're getting a new monitor and you've been holding on to an old one for a while, it's a good time to get new ones just to make sure they are up to date and can handle the appropriate bandwidth to do stuff like 4K and HDR and all those things together, because that takes more bandwidth than what we had way earlier with HDMI and DisplayPort. They've upped it. DisplayPort's at, I believe their highest level is 1.4 and HDMI is at 2.1.
That sounds about right.
And instead of just going down and saying these cables are good, these Monoprice as a company tends to have reasonably priced products. And if they say it's a certain thing, then it is what they say it is. They have a reputation for that. Sometimes you go on Amazon, you'd be like, oh, this is a good cable. And you look at it and check it out. And turns out whatever the seller fly by night just sort of put whatever they want on there and just ran away with your money. Monoprice has a good reputation for when it comes to price and being reliable on the specifications of their products. So, yeah, I would look. This is not the monitor for you, my friend. This one, Corsair. Look elsewhere. Also, this might not even be the right time for OLED. I'd give it a little while longer because there are some more going to come out, and when they do, some older models, which are still perfectly good, will descend in price, and that might be a better option. Or you could get something like not Gigabyte's monitors have been really good at 4K, even though they're not OLED. They're still IPS, but they've got very good high dynamic range. They might not have the best true blacks on them, but they do have very good brightness and they look good. So that's, that Monitors Unboxed. If you want a good recommendation for a bunch of monitors, it's a sub channel for Hardware Unboxed, and good Lord, they are way into doing it right. So check Monitors Unboxed for reviews and for roundup. They do roundups too. So if you want an idea of what's good at different price points.
So given the time, let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, we're running. Okay. Hey, Nash and Mike, I've got an old Raspberry Pi Model B that I wanted to use as a Plex server. I know there's a Linux version of Plex, so that's not going to be a problem. But what I want to know is, can the Raspberry Pi handle it? I plan on hooking up to a USB hard drive. I can't speak tonight. Putting it up way on a shelf because it won't take up much space, but is it worth it? Thanks, Doug R.
Yes, it absolutely is a thing that can be done with the Model B. There are, in fact, pages and pages of here's 7 or 8 different ways of installing Plex on Raspberry Pi.
Yeah. Yes, it will work, but it's also a matter of what you're going to be doing with it. If it's just maybe you and someone else watching, video now and again, usually that's not a problem because that's only like 1 or 2 streams it's sending across the network at any given time. The more streams it has to do and the higher the resolution it has to do them in, and you also add on stuff like HDR and stuff, that increases the overhead the CPU has to handle. Usually with like a PC, you could add a graphics card and it improves the encoding. So that speeds up and you don't have to wait for it. There's no buffering or anything like that. Sometimes even Intel's built-in graphics, something called QuickSync allows for better encoding. The Raspberry Pi Model B doesn't have so it's all going to be a question of how hard are you going to be hitting this thing. If you're just going to be watching stuff like in 1080p and streaming to maybe 1, maybe 2 systems at the same time, you're fine. You're good. Yeah. But if you're going up to like 4K, if you're going to be like doing HDR stuff, if there's a bunch of people in your household that are going to be using it at the same time,
you might want something robust.
Yeah. In that case, a full PC would be fine, but you can go back a couple generations. So an old used system like Intel 6th gen, 7th gen, 8th gen, Ryzen 3000 or something like that. Those are good options for, not a lot of money. But I understand you already have the Raspberry Pi. It's sitting there. It will work. It's just, if you try it and you start noticing that the videos are buffering a lot, it's not the time wheel is showing up, it might be indicative that your Raspberry Pi is a little underpowered and you might want something else. But you won't know until you try it. But for a lot of people, it is a perfectly fine option.
And because it's a Raspberry Pi, if you go, oh, well, it turns out not to be quite powerful. It's really easy to, of course, just remove that and just retask the Raspberry Pi to something else.
Yeah. Neat little devices. All right. Last question this week. Hey, Nash and Mike and Floofs. Just a quick one. I wanted to know how the Stream Deck was working out for you and if it was worth getting. I do a little streaming and it looks like it could help some. Thanks, Nancy. I got a Stream Deck.
At the beginning of the episode, you noticed that Nash is having a firmware issue.
The software, not firmware, software. It's the Stream Deck software. But I got a Stream Deck Plus, which is the 8-button with the touchscreen and the 4 dials. There's also some other simpler ones, like one that's got 6 buttons, one that's got 12 buttons, one's got something like 32 buttons. It all depends on what you're going to be doing with it. The Stream Deck Plus, the reason I got that was it has effectively replaced my mixer because it unlocks Wavelink virtual mixing software. So I have a virtual mixer on my computer now. I didn't need a physical one anymore. Not all the Stream Decks do that. Just the Stream Deck Plus is the only one that gives you Wavelink. So if that's something you're looking for, you have to get a Stream Deck Plus. The only downside is you only get 8 buttons. Now, you can get multiple pages of buttons and swipe across with the little touchscreen, but they need to fix the software for that. Anyway, what I've thought so far, it's been incredibly useful. I have no problems with it. I had no problems with it until they screwed up the software. They're going to fix that. They will probably fix that soon. It has a lot of options, a lot of plugins, a lot of things that will allow you to do. I mean, I can control my air conditioner with the damn thing. It's remarkable. In terms of how it's very helpful for controlling stream, especially like when I'm playing full screen games. If I wanted to change a shot, I would have to click over to OBS, which would take me out of full screen, and then the monitor has to flip over, and that causes some issues and blah, blah. I don't have to do that. I just push a button, and I don't have to switch out of anything. It just controls it. If you don't need the audio stuff or don't want the audio stuff, don't get the Stream Deck Plus. It's the most expensive. Well, the second most. I think the one with the 32 buttons is their most expensive, but you don't need the dials are not. If you want them, get them. But if you don't need them, don't do it. If you just need the buttons, just get the buttons. Here's a way to test it out to see if it really will be helpful for you. There's an app on your smartphone. You do have to pay for it, but you can, it gives you effectively a virtual Stream Deck on your phone. It's just, the touchscreen buttons, the touchscreen becomes the buttons. You lose the tactile sense, but if you want to see if it will be useful for you and help with your workflow, whatever you want to do, that's a good way to test it out. It will cost you, but it will cost you a lot less than buying, a full Stream Deck. Also, I got mine used, and I haven't had a problem with it. So depending on who you get it from,
You haven't had a problem with it from the used part of it.
Yeah, the used part's not. The hardware is fine. The hardware is perfectly fine. It's so neat too. It's helped tremendously. I already had some Stream Deck functionality. It was built into my Corsair keyboard. It gives you 6 buttons on your Corsair keyboard. The only trouble is you can only assign them to one profile. You can't do multiple, blah, 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 blah. But even then, those 6 buttons were coming in handy for streaming. So it's a very nice system. I'm happy with it. I know there are some alternatives to it out there. There are some other people on the market who are making versions of the Stream Deck for, I checked some reviews, but so far as I know, I like mine. I'm happy with it. So, okay, that is going to do us for this week. We'll be back next Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern. If you have tech questions for me and Mike, send those to requests@radiodeadair.com. We will attempt to help you out with those. In the meanwhile, for Mike and myself, we will see you next time. Good night, everybody.